Welcome to the Prado Museum. We're here again with our weekly session in English on the museum's social media programming just a few minutes before the museum opens. And this is a project, as you know, supported by our nonprofit American Friends of the Prado Museum. And our mission is to support many projects, help spread information about this wonderful museum to the world. And we do this also thanks to our members. We want to send out a special thanks to them and encourage everyone to find out about Friends of the Museum and the Spanish Amigos del Museo del Prado, two institutions very dedicated to this wonderful collection. Today we are in a very special place, the Hall of Muses, with a very different kind of session. We're going to have a joint session with the National Museum of Sweden. And this is to commemorate the figure of Queen Christina of Sweden, who is the abdicated queen and who I've learned so much about here at the Prado Museum. So what does Christina of Sweden, the abdicated queen, have to do with the Prado in Spain? For me, it's been a really interesting journey to learn about her and how she's influenced here in the Prado's collection. Will tell us more about her biography. She was a figure that caused a lot of interest during her lifetime. For context, she was a little bit younger than Philip IV of Spain, and actually she is famous because she abdicated from the crown of Sweden, and she converted from Protestantism to Catholicism. And she did this while she was in Brussels under the protection of the Spanish monarchy. And so there was a moment that she was quite close diplomatically with Philip IV of Spain, and there are two wonderful paintings that she gave as a gift to Philip IV, which are Adam and Eve of Jura. And thanks to that gift, they're here at the Prado Museum. Very worthwhile to see. And then she went on and she lived in Rome. Their relations with Spain changed, and she lived in Rome, where she had her own palace and was a very avid art collector of painting and of sculpture and of books and of many elements. She was really kind of a Renaissance woman who was interested in everything. And what is interesting in her, after she passed away, and what happened to her collection is that the paintings were dispersed. They were kind of sold individually earlier or later. But her classical sculpture collection, which she had set up kind of in a proto-museum style, stayed together. And after she passed away, passed through different hands until it was really the King of Spain, the later King of Spain, Philip V, and his wife, Queen Isabella Farnese, were really interested in Roman classical sculpture, and her sculpture collection was still together 35 years later after her passing. And it was those monarchs that purchased the collection of almost 70 Roman works of sculpture that came to Spain, first to the Granja of San Ildefonso Palace, which is a lovely place that everyone needs to visit. And from there, when the Prado Museum opened in the 1800s, they were brought to this collection. And so in other English sessions, we've talked about the Dionysiac Party, which was the Roman altar, Orestes and Pylades, which were the friendship sculpture called the Group of San Ildefonso. All of these come from her collection, and these muses that we're seeing here. There were stars in her collection. There were 8 muses. There are 9 in mythology. They had found 8, and she had asked the best local sculptors, as in Bernini and others of the like, to reconstruct kind of the missing parts. Now, this was very typical of what you would do in the 1600s. But they're Roman sculptures of the muses, but with more modern heads and other details that were added later by contemporary sculptors of Christina of Sweden. And so she's very significant in the Prado's collection, and it's been really interesting to find out more about her. So can I introduce her now? Okay, and so now we have the pleasure of sharing this session today with the curator in the National Museum of Sweden in Stockholm. Eva-Lena Karlsson is with us, and she knows a lot more about Christina of Sweden and is going to share her knowledge with us as well.
Thank you and good morning and welcome to Stockholm International Museum and to our Baroque
Welcome to Spain too.
Christina is, just as you said in talking about her sculpture collection, a very fascinating figure. She was only 5 when her father died. If she had had a brother, she would not have inherited the throne, but she was the only child, so at that very young age, she became Queen of Sweden. There was a regency, of course. A 5-year-old child could not herself decide the politics of one of the great powers of Northern Europe in those days. At the age of 18, she was allowed to reign herself. But her interests were not only the political side. Of course, she was a very beautiful queen, having her counselors. Sweden was also involved in the 30 Years' War, etc., etc. But her main interests were, just as we have heard earlier this morning, culture, there was also science and religion. You have heard about her converting to the Roman Catholicism, which was, of course, outrageous in the Lutheran Protestant Sweden in those days. In Christina's time, several intellectuals and artists were called to come to Stockholm. I would say that the most famous was the philosopher René Descartes, the French philosopher, who also happened to die here of pneumonia. Stockholm was not always a nice city. It could be very, very cold, rainy and snowy. And among the artists she called were Sebastian Bourdon, where you in Prado has the most wonderful work of his portraits, the great equestrian portrait of Queen Christina, which you have also seen this morning. But he also had other artists. Here you have another example of a Netherlandish artist, David Beck, who was also called for. He came earlier than Bourdon, around 1650. And he also, more or less in Sweden, introduced a kind of intellectual, allegorical portraits. For instance, here Christina is not just depicted as a person, but she's also one of the 4 elements. She is the fire, the element that brings all other elements to life. And of course, both her religious interest and her interest in science and in the arts brought her to leave Sweden. She had quite other possibilities on the continent, especially down in Rome. We have very little of her collections left here in Sweden. Portraiture we still have, a couple of paintings, and a few sculptures, some Roman examples of Roman antiquity, sculptures that she had bought from Cox, a collector in Antwerp in the Spanish Netherlands. But coming to sculpture and also coming to paintings, you have a much larger part of the collections down in Prado, so that is also for us here in Sweden a very good reason to travel to Madrid and to travel to Prado in order to see your wonderful collections.
So thank you. Am I on? Yeah. Thank you very much, Eva-Lena Karlsson, for this connection. This is very special. Thank you from the Prado Museum. And we welcome everyone to all museums to see and learn about our past and our artistic treasures. And we hope to see you again in our next session in English. And with this, we'll sign off. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.